What's up, everyone? This is Wild Phil with Wild Philosophy. Let's get wild, right? Wrong. Let's get serious for today. Today's episode, we're going to talk about EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Wow, I got it right. Anyways, listen, before you turn this video off, before you go off somewhere and you're like, who the hell is this guy? Let me just introduce myself, because I promise you this will be the best video you've ever watched on EMDR, okay? I know that's cocky, but stick around and I'll tell you why. Let me just give you stick around for 30 seconds and let me tell you why, okay? I'm a local stand-up comedian in the Chicagoland area, also a musician and podcaster named Wild Phil. Normally on my podcast, I got comedians, I got musicians, I got anybody that I find interesting where we just laugh at stuff, we crack jokes about trauma, and that's how we cope with it, is through comedy. And it's kind of a comedy-based podcast, but sometimes I like to have serious episodes like this to help other people out there who might be struggling through anxiety, through depression, through OCD, and who are suicidal, just like I was. And EMDR helped me. So I'm not over yet. I'm going to tell you. I'm sure you're thinking, who the fuck is this guy? Well, I answered that question, and you're like, what am I going to get out of this video that I wouldn't get out of another video? Let me tell you what. Because I was in that position. I was suicidal. I was at the edge of my fucking life. And I'm like, I need to find anything that will help me. And I was looking to do EMDR. But you know what I found? Probably exactly what you're finding. Either some self video of their progress that they don't even really know how to explain it thoroughly. Or the worst part is YouTubers that are just basically desperate for viewers, so they look up a generic definition off of Wikipedia or Google, and they got, fucking in the background a video of a family running through wheat fields like it's an antidepressant commercial, and you're left with not even a surface level of understanding of what is EMDR, what does it do, what the hell is this? It's information I could have Googled myself, right? Today, I'm going to go over everything, okay? Thank you for sticking around, for those who did. I'm going to go over the basics, what it does, what a therapy session with EMDR is like, how exactly it functions, and if you stick around to the end, I can tell you my story. And we're going to all do it in Wild Phil, average Joe terms, okay? So let's get started. Before I get started into the basics, I have to mention this because I'm just so riled up. I'm so excited to do this video. The reason why is because here's what's funny. Recently, I became a speaker for NAMI. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it's a National Association for Mental Illness. And it's basically like I do like these little 15-minute TED Talks, in high schools, in adult support groups, sometimes even in grammar schools. And wherever it takes me, to try and teach people about like my journey through my PTSD and trauma. And here's the funny thing. They told me that I'm not able to say this. I'm not able to give people recommendations or shit on other types of treatments like medication and stuff. But guess what? This is Wild Philosophy. And like I said, I'm blunt and I'm truthful. I'm going to tell you how it is. EMDR is the fucking cure. If you are in a horrible place, if you're like, this is it, I've got nothing to lose, like I'm ready to fucking leave this fucking world, I'm telling you, EMDR is the fucking cure. It's a goddamn miracle. It's the reason why I didn't commit suicide. It's the reason why I have never been this happy. Now, what do I mean by that? I'm just going to give two examples for you before I get into the basics of how much I changed. I have people from my past, old friends of mine that were with me when I had a pretty fucking criminal past. A lot of my friends OD'd from drugs or died or ended up in jail. And the ones that didn't, when they run into me, they're like, Phil? Wait, you own a house. You have a family. You have a wife that you don't beat and that you're not an alcoholic. You have a kid that loves you. And you're just unbelievably happy and calm. What are you a cyborg? Did somebody reprogram you? And the answer is yes. EMDR eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, reprogramming. I was reprogrammed. I'm on 0 meds today. And so that's the first thing I want to tell you of how drastic and mind-blowing the change was. That I run into people from my past and they're like, "You're a completely different person. Like I can't believe where you are today." Like and you have this comedy career and you're I've written so many like music albums. It's mind-blowing. The other thing that this is what's really gonna, I think, that I need to share for people to understand what a change it made in me. The old me before EMDR, I'm not joking. Every 3 or 4 days, I would just bottle up all of my stress and depression and anxiety and just bawl my eyes out. It reminds me of my favorite movie is Buffalo. One of my favorite movies is Buffalo 66. And in that movie, the main character really reminds me of my upbringing, just a traumatic upbringing with a horrendous family. And he goes to visit his family. The first thing he does is he says, "I have to go take a shower." And the reason why is because he goes into a fetal position and just bawls his eyes out. I had to do that every 4 fucking days. I had to do it so often that I eventually developed like a routine, it was like, all right, I'm going to pencil this in. I'm not even joking. It was like, and what helped me even more, because the dopamine that got released when I cried made me feel better. So it was like, all right, in 4 days, what are we going to listen to this time to really push me off the edge? Old Nine Inch Nails, maybe some depressing Pink Floyd. No. Maybe some ambient piano Aphex Twin, It was like, I couldn't stop crying. I am not joking. I have everyone around me as proof. It has been 9 months since I started EMDR, and I have never shed a tear. It's the weirdest thing in the fucking world. I'm telling you, it is literally mind-blowing. You know why? Here's the like funny and crazy part is these therapists, these EMDR therapists, they'll say like, "Listen, you don't understand. You're going to be as happy as you were as a child." And I'm like, "But I wasn't happy as a child. I got beat up by my fucking parents. My mom told me how fat I was, how ugly I was, that I'm going to end up just like my dad. And then I'd go to school and got the same fucking treatment from bullies. So I wasn't happy. So this is the first time in my life that I've gone this long with 0 anxiety, 0 depression, no crying, and no meds. It's weird. It's weird. I keep thinking that there's like some giant human above me and they're playing Sims and they just like reprogrammed my character because I've never been this happy for this long. I literally can't cry. Like, sometimes when I get stressed out recently, I'd be like, yeah, you know what? Maybe I should go to those days where I put on some old Nine Inch Nails and cry my stress out. And I can't. Because I have to do something happy and productive, like work out. So anyways, let's get to the basics. Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. I have to do it again. What does that mean? Let's talk about it. I'm going to mention everything I can in Wild Phil terms for you to understand for the average Joe, right? So what is it? If I had to explain it in my terms, I would call it scientifically proven, backed, guaranteed, and triangulated hypnosis therapy. And you're probably still like, well, what the fuck does that mean? Okay, what it means is it's you get hypnotized. But the other thing is that, so I want to read off a real quick fact that will blow your mind, okay? 90% of trauma survivors had no PTSD after 3 sessions of EMDR. That is a true study. I couldn't believe that it was 90%. I used to think it was 40. Then I looked it up again in a different search engine and on several different websites, and the other website said it was 77%. So it's either 77% or 90% of people who go through EMDR therapy after 3 sessions have no symptoms anymore. It's gone. And it is literally, after taking a few surveys of people who have taken EMDR, they guarantee that your symptoms will get at the very least 30% better after one session. That's a fucking guarantee. Now think about it. For those of you struggling out there who have horrible anxiety, you cannot make it. You don't want to get out of bed. You cry all the time. You feel ashamed. You feel like a burden. You feel like nobody likes you. I know what that felt like. Imagine if you could just dial that down even as little as 30%. Isn't that progress? And where can you go from there? That's why EMDR is so fucking amazing, and that's why it's the cure. So back to the basics, okay? I gotta go in order and shit. So, all right. So scientifically backed. It's proven. The statistics are there, all right? Now, when I said it's triangulated hypnosis, what does that mean? First thing I want to tell you, okay, everybody hears hypnosis and they fucking cackle and laugh at it like it's, these people who are not even, they don't even read one book a year and they're scientists, right? So because they don't look into it. Movies, I grew up as a Polish immigrant, but I grew up in America. I didn't learn English till I was 10. But what I noticed is movies are probably the biggest influence of American culture. And unfortunately, a lot of movies have ruined the idea of hypnosis because it's this like mystical thing that people with crystals and supernatural spells do, right? But it works. And I'm going to go through exactly how it works, okay? And the reason why I said triangulated hypnosis, first of all, let's talk about how it's gotten ruined. The funny thing is, I got to mention, when people ask me, like I said, these people who see that I'm a different person, they always ask me, they're like, oh, what did you do? What did they do? Are you on Prozac? Are you doing jujitsu? No, I did EMDR. And they're like, what the fuck is that? I always tell people as a joke, I go, they office spaced my ass. For people who don't know, Office Space is kind of a pretty funny and good example of EMDR. For those who haven't seen that movie, I highly suggest it. It's one of my favorite movies because not only is it one of the funniest, but I live by Taoist beliefs, and that's like the most Taoist fucking movie other than like Big Lebowski. But in Office Space, for those of you who don't know, what happens is there's a really stressed out, disgruntled office worker who is just absolutely just fatigued and depressed with his everyday office job. So he goes to a therapist, a hypnosis therapist, and in the middle of the therapy, he's telling him, he's like, from now on, you're going to go through life with zero cares, with zero panic. You're going to wake up and think, you know what? Maybe I don't have to go to work today. Maybe it's okay to be late. Maybe I just, you know what? I'm not going to wear a suit today. I'll wear a Hawaiian shirt, khakis, and flip-flops, And in the middle of this hypnosis, the therapist gets a heart attack. So the main character is stuck in this sort of like carefree, peaceful, happy mindset. And that's what happened to me. They office spaced my ass. Sometimes I used to say, it's kind of like the movie Get Out, but to be perfectly honest, I know some people are going to hate me. I did not like that movie. Part of the reason why I didn't like it is because the way they portrayed hypnosis in there, it's sort of like the stereotypical stigmatized view of therapy that is in this culture. They're like, yo, that chick, she's gonna hypnotize your ass. She's gonna make you be walking around like a chicken. So it's these people who are ignorant to therapy, and look at what they made in the movie. So, anyways, that's an example. That's a little bit of an example of EMDR. I keep going off track. So what did I mean when I said triangulated? Well, EMDR is triangulated hypnosis because it focuses on childhood trauma. What that means is EMDR is a therapy that basically the main principle of EMDR is that everything that affects you today, I'm going to mention a shit ton of quotes by my therapist. I don't know if I said this before. My My therapist was amazing. He knew more about me in one session than a talk therapist knew about me in a decade. I am not kidding. I came out of there with tears of happiness. It was like he was this white magic Gandalf wizard who just knew me like that. And one of the quotes that he said, in EMDR, we believe that it's not about what's wrong with you. It's about what happened to you and your reaction to it. And that is what EMDR triangulates on, is what you learned since childhood. Now people think, oh, I didn't have a bad childhood or blah, blah, blah. But it's not even about it's not even about whether you think you had a bad childhood or whether you think you got affected by it. It's about what was the first time that you learned how to deal with fill in the blank. So I'm going to give you 3 quick examples so that it sort of translates well to the listeners, okay? 3 good examples are, my EMDR therapist, he said, I bet you all the money in my wallet right now that every single fucking morning when you wake up, you put on the same shoe and you tie your shoelaces the same way, grabbing the first whatever side lace. So say, for example, if I usually put my left shoe on and then I grab my right lace first and then my left one and then I tie it in, bunny ears, right? He was saying that he bets me that I have been doing that the same way for 10 years. And he was right. I actually tried the next morning to do it the opposite, and it felt awkward. And I came storming in there into the therapy. I'm like, yeah, well, that's because I'm dominant righty, so it's easier to reach left. And he's like, no, being righty or lefty has nothing to do with how you put your shoes on. And sure enough, that's something that the point is that that's something that we learned the very first time we put our shoes on, and ever since then. As soon as we got it right, as soon as we knew how to put on our shoe the right way and tie our shoes the right way, we just kept repeating that and repeating that. And slowly but surely, this carved a neural pattern. And what I mean by that, one of the best examples that this therapist also gave to me is that when you carve a neural pattern, imagine if what a neural pattern is, imagine if you were walking through the woods, but these woods are a jungle. There's no path. It's like if you got airdropped from a helicopter and a parachute in the middle of some random jungle. And now you're in this, like, there's all this brush and all these branches. And every single time you tie your shoes, it's like you walking from point A to 20 yards north. And every time that you do it, you know what happens, right? Each time you step on those plants, on those branches, you're slowly carving a path because all those branches are dying. So you're slowly making a path there. And each time you go, the path gets more and more wider because you're used to it. So you keep doing it. And that's a neural pattern, and that's what you learn from childhood. Another example that I like to give, that this is so goofy because this is just like, this shows how wild Phil I am. So I mentioned that I was a welder for 15 years. In welding, they give you this, what's called a sheet metal hammer. It basically looks like, it kind of looks like a masonry hammer. It's rectangle on one side and sharp as like a beak on the other. And what it's made for specifically, like a carpenter's hammer, it has like that crowbar shape. The sheet metal hammer is straight, and what it's made for is to shape metal on either a very pointy corner edge table or like an anvil, like when you forge something, right? Because you're bending metal into the right shape. So here's what happened. Nobody really, I'm a grown fucking man, so nobody really taught me how to properly do this. So I was just shaping it the way I would, for about 7 years until I started getting arthritis in my right hand. And the reason why is because you're hammering shit for 10 hours a day for 7 years. And what was happening is all of this impact that from hitting the hammer was going into my into the inside of my right hand, and I was getting arthritis. I was waking up with my hand completely asleep, feeling like there's ants crawling on it. And I just developed this neural pattern of this is how you do this job. So here's where it gets funnier. So I decided, because I've been in bands and stuff. Have you ever seen when a band is playing and there's a drummer and he's twirling a drumstick on his finger, right, to show off, like in the middle of a drum solo? I was like, wait a minute. When you use a sledgehammer, you lift the heavy part and then you kind of just slide your hand down. So you lift the hammer, but then you let it hit on its own so that you don't absorb the impact. So I was like, I'm just going to do that with my finger. Almost like I could twirl my hammer on my finger. So I started, every time I hit my hammer, I would, pull it back, start going forward, and then right before it hit, I would make my hand into like almost like I'm making the OK sign, like the where your thumb and point finger are together. And I would do that because then I wouldn't absorb any impact. It was almost like I was throwing the hammer and then catching it with my finger and thumb. Well, guess what? That's not really smart, because after doing that for about 5 years, I ended up messing up my thumb joint and having to go to physical therapy for it. And when I told them this bizarre story of how I use a hammer, they're like, yeah, you're going to have to develop a new neural pattern and relearn how to use a sheet metal hammer. Anyways, so what is EMDR? So let's get to, what does EMDR do? What exactly is EMDR? Let's talk about that. I'm sorry I'm rambling so much, but so what EMDR, the basics of how it started was, there was this therapist, I forgot his name. He was doing studies on what's called in your brain, it's called an amygdala. Now, I learned all of this. There's a book that I read that I highly suggest anybody listening to this. It's called Unfuck Your Anxiety. It's written by a psychology professor, but he wrote it like it's a Scorsese movie. So every 5 words, it's the word fuck. It gets annoying, but it gets the point across, and it's written in an average Joe terms so that I can understand. But what an amygdala is it's a walnut size piece of your brain that basically judges your fear and flight response, which, to be honest, is kind of a primitive part of our brain, because the way that we are coddled in 2022 and how much easier life has gotten since we were cavemen, we literally have 99% less dangers in our lives now than when we were cavemen. So this amygdala part that we had in our brain as cavemen kind of evolved so that we would know how to not only respond to danger, but to be able to sense when it's there. Like when there's a predator coming by, or when there's, a bear coming into a cave that you have your family in. Do I run, or do I stab him in the neck, or is he going to kill me? It judges your fear and flight response. Now, real quick, because I know somebody out there listening is wondering this, and I'm going to answer this for you because this is what I was wondering. Some people have so much anxiety and panic, like me, in the past, that I was like, well, why the hell do we have this part of our brain? Why can't we just get it removed? Answer A, there's 2 answers to this. Answer A is that, number one, like I said, it judges and sort of meters what kind of danger is present at the moment. So if we remove that part, everybody out in the world would be driving their cars at 120 miles an hour, putting out fires without wearing any sort of protection, it was just, there would be zero fear. So, and I'm not exaggerating that, because think about it. Basically, we would have a zero anxiety and fear brain, and more logical. So think about it. If you look at a GPS and it says, hey, I'd like to go like from where I live to Chicago, because I live in a suburb. For me to go to a comedy open mic from where I live to Chicago, it's about 20 miles, and it'll take me maybe 40 minutes, right? Well, wait a minute. Why would it take me 40 minutes? Oh, because I have to follow the speed limit. But what if there was no speed limit? It would still probably take me 40 minutes because I don't want to get in a car crash. Well, because I have no fear or flight response, I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to, it only logically makes sense to go 120 miles an hour. I mean, what's the problem? I mean, if I crash, well, yeah, I might end up at the hospital or whatever, but I have zero anxiety about crashing. So that's what would happen. So that's answer one, or answer A. Answer B, why do we have this amygdala? Like how does it serve us? Well, first of all, part of life is learning to deal with your anxieties and your depressions. It's never going away. And it's really fun when you learn how to manage it, because it ends up being like kind of like an annoying family member, where it's like, it feels good, because it's like they used to come around and they used to just grind at you, to piss you off. But now it's like, well, now they're around and I'm above them, because I know how to control them. I know how to deal with them. Like, they're bizarre, Anxiety telling me to catastrophize every situation. Pfft, you're fucking stupid, So answer B, as to why wouldn't we remove this surgically. Here's an interesting fact. I'm sleep epileptic, so I can relate to this, that there are people out there who aren't just nocturnally epileptic. I've had only a history of seizures in my sleep. It's kind of rare, but there are people who have seizures every 5 minutes, and sadly, it's actually so people who have epilepsy have different triggers. I've never been triggered by strobe lights. I've never been triggered by, I've never had a seizure during the day. I got triggered by sleep deprivation. Well, some people have such severe epilepsy that they're actually triggered by anxiety and stress, not just physical stress, like being in the sun too long or something, but anxiety. And those people have such intense seizures because of their anxiety. I mean, think about how sad of a quality of life they have, because it's like you get a seizure because you were stressed out, and then the moment you come to it, you're even more anxious, because you're like, wait, I got a seizure because I was anxious. Well, now I'm anxious that I'm going to get a seizure. And so what doctors did was they surgically removed part of their amygdala. And I'm pretty sure they had to have like retraining into how to judge, dangerous situations, because in that occasion, it was beneficial for that person to have their amygdala removed. Anyways, moving on to oh man, I'm rambling so much. So what did this therapist who was developing EMDR find out about the amygdala? What he found out was, when people are fearful, the image that I'm painting in my mind is in the movie Shawshank Redemption. And for people who don't know, there's a scene, it's about this guy who goes to jail that's wrongfully accused for a crime. So he's in jail, and now it's his job to do laundry in jail. And he has to deal with all the criminals that are sort of hazing him, right? And there's a scene where he's going into the laundry room to put away whatever clothes that he folded, and these 3 rapists come out of nowhere to beat him up, right? And as you see that scene, his eyes are moving very quickly left to right. And we always see that, right? We've always see that in movies and cartoons, where when somebody is in a dangerous position, their eyes are moving left to right very quickly, right? You never see somebody just like, I guess the situation is dangerous, I better do something. They're always like, they're panicking, right? It's their amygdala. And so we naturally start moving our eyes left to right. And this therapist was like, why do we do that? Why do we do that? Why is that? It's kind of a weird natural response, because it's like, it's almost like unconscious that we move our eyes left to right. Imagine, like, I don't know, every time we smelled delicious pizza, we just started snapping our fingers. It's a weird physical response. So what he found out is, this is a natural response because it actually desensitizes our amygdala. We are doing this naturally to sort of put ourselves at calm and analyze and very like calmly look at the situation, because no amount of panic is going to help you get out of it. So it's more beneficial to remain calm and like logically try to figure out what would be the best action to do at that point, right? So we naturally did that. And he was like, "Oh, guess what?" So the first thing he found out is this is actually, there's articles about this. You can look it up. If you actually ever have panic attacks or anxiety, if you just started moving your eyes left to right rapidly, it actually puts your panic and anxiety down like at least 20% just by doing that. But that's not what EMDR is completely. I'm going to get to that. I'm still talking about how he figured this out. So what he figured out is that when we're doing that left to right thing, what our brain is doing, it's not just desensitizing our amygdala in order to calm down. It's also going left to right because it's trying its best to process the situation, to sort of like carefully investigate what is going on here, what should I do, and what are my decisions, and what is the best decision here. So here's what happens with trauma, okay? No matter what trauma you had, trauma is so intense and so terrifying that oftentimes, every time, our brain doesn't process it right. It's literally like putting a Windows 11 disk into, well, we don't even have disks anymore, but it's like trying to run a PS5 game on a Nintendo. Our brain isn't made to deal with that trauma because we live in 2022. We're not cavemen constantly running from predators. We don't have physical like threats. We don't even have anxious threats. You know, we're not like in a dictatorship country where you could get shot for going outside or whatever. So we're not used to this trauma. And so our brain doesn't really know how to they're like, this is the wrong software. I don't know how to process this. So this is exactly what EMDR does. And what I like to compare it to is it's like cutting your leg open on a dirty parking lot. Okay. Now it's going to get a little graphic, but picture this. So here's what happens. First, I'm going to tell you literally what happens, and then I'm going to give you the examples so that you better understand. Literally what happens when we have trauma as children. The reason, like I said, the reason why it's important, we'll just assume that it's as children because it's important because that is where we develop those neural patterns to deal with that trauma later in life. So here's what happens. We get put in a traumatic situation. Say we get bullied at school, right? We don't know how to react. And however we react, it's going to traumatize us. We could fight them and we could be like, well, I'm a good person. I have a conscience. And so beating this person up is going to make me feel guilty later in life. Or even the next hour, you're going to feel bad. Like, I don't want to do this. You're going to feel bad if you don't fight and then you cry and people laugh at you. And this is what develops trauma. And this whole time your brain's like, oh, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. So what it does is it stores these memory files in your brain that are attached to emotions together. Now, what I'm saying is, I know you're thinking, you're like, well, if you didn't have emotions, you'd be a sociopath. Correct. But what I'm saying is, here's a funny thing to ask yourself. I like horror movies a lot. I like intense movies. I was watching recently, what was it? I forgot what it, I just recently watched Smile, the new horror movie. But then even before, I was watching Devil's Rejects, the Rob Zombie movie, with my wife. And there's a scene where this guy is holding this whole family hostage, and he's forcing this guy to have sex with his wife in front of him while he's got a shotgun pointed at him. And it was super anxious, right? I'm watching this scene, and I'm like, God, this is brilliant film writing. Like they're encapsulating this situation so well. But I'm not being traumatized. I'm just like, this is acted well, right? How come I can watch that and not be traumatized? How come we can watch somebody get beat up on YouTube, or we can watch somebody get made fun of on YouTube, but when it happens in real life, it traumatizes us? It's that emotion part. And what EMDR does, what you'll notice later on, what EMDR does, the desensitization and the reprocessing, it turns whatever trauma you had into your own movie without the emotions. So here's the comparison that I want to use about what happens to your brain when you have trauma. Imagine if you were, I don't know, like, because this kind of half happened to me, but I was skateboarding in a parking lot in an area where people don't go because people didn't like you skateboarding. So imagine you're skateboarding in this like abandoned parking lot, but it's by a dumpster, so it's like leaking, garbage and rotting food, and you fall and you cut your leg open on a piece of glass, and you get all this infected old garbage and stuff in your leg. So imagine now that wound is the trauma. So your body's not used to getting cut open all the time. It's not. So now you cut yourself open, and now all this garbage and the rotting food, that's like the trauma seeping into your body, right? And you're like, I'm not going to see I'm not going to see a doctor. I'm not going to see, I'm not going to get some help. It's going to heal on its own. What happens? What happens with that leg? 2 days go by and it starts swelling. It hurts really bad that first day. But if it processed right, then it would start healing. But it's not healing. It's swelling. And then a few more days go by, maybe a week, and it starts getting infected and bruising up. It's your leg starts looking like a balloon, right? And then it gets worse. It starts turning purple and gray because your leg is getting so infected you might need it amputated. And the further you go in your life, you're walking on this infected leg. That is exactly what trauma is, because you had a wound that happened to you and it didn't process right. It didn't heal right. So you're walking around, you're literally, when you are traumatized, you're walking around with a wound that never healed right. So that's what you're doing with that leg. Now here's what EMDR does. It says, "Oh, you got a pretty messed up leg there." What we're going to do is we're going to directly go over that trauma all over again. We're going to hit it directly, but this time we're going to heal it right. We're going to cut that fucking wound open with an X-Acto knife, let all that infection spill out. We're going to sterilize it. We're going to stitch it up, and it's going to heal right. And here's the best part. This is why this is so relative to EMDR. And a great example for EMDR is that when you stitch that wound up, you'll have a scar, just like you'll have a memory, but that memory will no longer be associated with pain, and that scar will no longer have pain. You'll have a pretty badass scar. You'll look pretty cool, but there will be no more pain. You'll remember it, and you'll never have bad emotions about it. That's what EMDR does. Okay, so I think I talked about it enough as far as statistics, what it is. Now let's just get into what goes into a therapy session, okay? For some people who are wondering. So first of all, I'm going to give you some crazy facts that I guess I will be honest, they're kind of my theory, but they add up. They add up. Okay, I'm not going to go Alex Jones on you, but they fucking add up. And the truth is, why don't people do EMDR? Why isn't it well known? Well, number one, what I will tell you, and I'll warn you about, EMDR is the boot camp of therapy. And I'll explain soon why. But it is the boot camp. So I will tell you right now exactly the requirements of what happened when I went to EMDR in a little bit. But I will tell you it's the hardest therapy to go through. But that's also why it's the most efficient. That's why it's the most efficient. It's sort of like, I guess the way I would compare it to is it reminds me of that movie Trainspotting it's about a bunch of heroin addicts. It's like you could be put on all these medications. You could be going to support groups. You could be going to rehab, right? But EMDR is like in Trainspotting when the main character, the heroin addict, he's like, you know what? I need to fucking get off of this stuff. And what does he do? He nails himself shut in a room with a bucket for like 2 weeks, and he just goes through the withdrawals. You have to hit it hard. If you hit it hard enough, then the benefits are as hard. So that's the first thing I was going to say. Second thing I want to talk about. So what goes into EMDR? Like what is the therapy session like? What was I saying? Why isn't it as common? Here's the part that's my theory. Because EMDR is not just preventable, but it's like it exterminates. It doesn't just prevent trauma. It fucking it destroys it. It disintegrates it. It's not preventable. It's disintegrating. You know, when the health insurance companies, they like to, is it profitable for us or preventable? Because if it's preventable, we don't want it. Oh, not only do you not want, you don't want anyone to fucking hear about EMDR because it gets rid of that shit for good. It gets rid of it for good. And that's why you don't hear about it. I mean, health insurance does cover it, but it's not a popular thing. But it's also not a popular thing. You know, I'm not going to get into it because of American lifestyle. American lifestyle prioritizes work over health. That is why I've Ubered people who are from England, people who are from France, and it blows their mind that there are people who have ailments in America, but they don't go and get them taken care of because we don't have universal health care. All right, let's not go on that rant. Anyways, but that's the truth, that's why people don't go through it, because they're like, I want to keep going to work. Just give me Xanax, you know? I'll just blanket over, you know? I just want to tell you real quickly, taking any medications for these issues, you still, before I get into how a therapy session works, I want to give another quote that my EMDR therapist said, okay? Listen, this is how I feel. This is my opinion. It might offend some people, but this is exactly what my EMDR therapist told me, and I 100% agree with him. Okay. He asked me, there's just no medication that works. There's no medication that, okay, I will tell you, and he told me, if there is anything, SSRIs are the most beneficial, like with the least side effects and, you know, the most successful. But anything other than SSRIs is it's just tucking shit away under a rug and putting a fucking rug over it. That's all it is. Taking anything other than like SSRIs is the same thing as drinking yourself to fucking oblivion with vodka. It's the same thing as shooting up with heroin to cover up your problems. It doesn't fix the problems. It just gets you in a state that make you forget that the problems are still there. It doesn't help you resolve them. And so what I will tell you is that's another part of the reason why EMDR is a boot camp, because one of my therapist's high recommendations, I mean, he can't really control this, but one of the things he told me, he said, what I want you to do is I want you to be on, before we start anything, I want you to be on 0 meds. I don't want you regularly smoking weed or drinking. I want you to be 100% sober, and then I think is the right time to start our treatment. And that's why it worked. That's why it worked for me. So, and that's part of the reason why I said it's a boot camp, because some people are not able to do that. But you have to do those things to have it work properly. Let's finally get into what is a therapy session like. I found my EMDR doctor because it's becoming more and more increasingly popular. So I looked for just the closest EMDR person. They said they were full, so they recommended me to my my therapist, who was he just opened up his practice. And so he was actually looking for new patients, and you know, it was a little bit further from my house, but I was absolutely desperate. So here's what happened. So that's how I found him. I mean, what I'm saying is, you can Google your nearest EMDR therapist and look at the reviews, and I'm telling you, it will be success. So we're gonna go over a therapy session right now, what to expect and what to. When I say what to expect, I mean like you should expect these things, because this would be the proper way to do it. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to go there, and the first few, here's what I have to say about EMDR. Here's another quote that my EMDR therapist said. Well, you have to understand that I was not expecting this. Every EMDR session, every one EMDR session is equal to 6 months of talk therapy. No joke. And I 100% agree with that. And I'll tell you why. It's, you know what, I guess the only, this is going to sound so messed up, but the only example I could give to that is when I've heard like a lot of like hippie stoner metal band fans talk about, why should I meditate for 20 years to reach enlightenment when I could just take acid one night? So I guess EMDR is like acid in this occasion, but I'll explain. So the first, what I'm saying is, for EMDR to work, I would highly suggest, number one, like I said, be sober, and it's you're gonna have to dedicate about 6 months, at least 6 months. And here's why EMDR is so unbelievable. So let's talk about. I keep fucking going off on a tangent. I'm sorry. So here's what happens. The first 2 sessions that you go to EMDR is literally just going to be you telling your life story to your EMDR therapist, them documenting absolutely everything about you. Then you're going to, from that story, specify what parts do you think traumatized you? What exactly made you go to EMDR? Like, what issues are you dealing with in the present? And then the third part of those first 2 sessions is, what was the first time you felt that way? So, for example, I went to my first session, gave my therapist my whole history about, my childhood and my horrible relationship with my mom. And then he was like talking about, so how does that coincide with today? Well, at the time, my mom was on her, like literally 3 months away from her death. She was on her deathbed. She was going through ALS. And I felt weird because she was so traumatizing. So I'm like, I feel like obligated to feel bad. But I hate this fucking person. But I feel guilty. I feel like a horrible person. And then when I said that, I feel like a horrible person, I feel guilty, you go into the childhood trauma. He goes, all right, the third part of that orientation is, when was the first time that you felt guilty? Like, why do you feel guilty? Oh, well, I feel guilty because, like, I feel like I'm not being a good son. He goes, why do you feel like you're not being a good son? He's like, well, because I was told. I'm like, I was told that I was a bad son. Okay. When was the first time that you felt guilty for doing something to your mom and you felt like you were a bad son? And we went straight into that. And the answer was that, I grew up with a narcissistic mom that had panic outbursts. I mean, she was literally like, I remember in Godfather, the sister of what's his name? Of Sonny, who she's just goes wild and starts throwing plates everywhere and screaming. That's my mom would do those things. And as a child, I developed this neural pattern that I felt it was my responsibility to make her happy. Like, the first thing was, obviously, as a child, you're always going to feel at fault. But even when I tried to move past that, it was like, it doesn't fucking matter. It's my responsibility to make this toxic person feel good, And so what ended up happening is I developed this neural pattern. And so so the first like I said, the first few sessions are going to be assessing your life history. What is your trauma? And when was the first time you had that trauma? Then once they do that, about your second, I would say maybe your third or fourth session, you will get into the actual eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And it's absolutely fascinating how this works. What happens is you sit down. The first thing you do is you rate what feeling you have. So I thought about like one of the first times that I felt so this is going to blend in with my story. I don't mind using my examples of trauma. My mom, when I was a kid, she used to lock me up in my room for like 6-7 hours at a time. It was absolutely fucking terrifying because she locked me in there. She wouldn't respond. There was absolute silence. I would bang on the door. I would scream. I even tried jumping out my window one time and almost broke my leg because I needed to piss and shit. I was like, my mom abandoned me. It was like being in a cage. I'm like, what am I supposed to do? If I crap on the floor, I'm going to get even in more trouble. I didn't know what to do. It was so terrifying to me. And I felt at fault. Right? I felt guilty. So what they do is once you get right before you start reprocessing, the therapist sits you down and they go, so what how did you feel at this moment? Or no. You know what they do? They give you a sort of like a 1 to 10 feeling scale of, so how do you feel? Like, how would you describe how you feel right now? Okay, anxious, depressed, traumatized, a little bit like triggered, right? Those 4 things, right? And then he tells you from a scale of 1 to 10, how anxious do you feel? How triggered do you feel? And from that moment, that's when the reprocessing starts. That's when the hypnosis starts. And in that session, he will keep doing the hypnosis until that level 9 out of 10 anxiety, that level 9 out of 10 depression reaches 1 star, 0 stars. And that's what happens. What happens is after you do that survey, you sit down and you go through every single detail of that first time that you felt traumatized. He's like, what do you see right now? I just see my door and there's like a little crack because I've been banging on it. He's like, okay, now think about that. Think about that right now. And then I have to follow his finger. I'm following his finger left to right, left to right, left to right, left to right. It's like, okay. Now, is there anything else you remember? I go, yeah, I remember my window. It was like a little bit broken, so I didn't know if I could fit through it because I wanted to jump out. Okay, now think about that now, And what basically happens is I don't want to make this extra longer, but what happens is here's what scientific hypnosis is. I went over this situation that I was locked in my room, that I was abandoned, that I was devastated, that the person who's supposed to care for me is just betraying me. I go over this situation, I go over my feelings, and then I go over, how did you feel? And it was like, well, I immediately processed it as I did something wrong. It was my fault. I should have been smarter. I should have been feeling better. I should have been a better son and all these things, right? And guess what? Anybody who hears that story is like, your mom is a cunt. She's full of shit. Everything about that was absolutely wrong. To lock a kid in any room for that long, a fucking child, that is so fucked up. So how did I rationalize that? And what do? Is they put you in hypnosis and they go, well, how do you feel about it now? How do you think you should have felt it? Like if you looked at it now as an adult with your own child. And then I reprocessed it. I was like, it was nowhere near my fault. If anything, and we're processing. I keep following his finger. He goes, how do you feel now? I go, I feel like my parents didn't deserve me. He's like, okay, what do you mean by that? I go, I feel like I was a prodigy. I mean, look at who I am today. I've accomplished 20 times better than them. I'm a happy, married family man with a child who loves me, with a wife who loves me. I don't have a addiction. The police aren't over every weekend. They didn't deserve me. They had a fucking prodigy child. I was a prodigy child born from 2 complete moron idiots that didn't deserve to have a child because they didn't know how to take care of it. And that's what brought my confidence up. That's what changed me. It helped me reprocess that situation. It completely reshaped my emotions that are attached to that trauma. Similar to how, when we're kids, I remember when I was a kid, I loved hearing firecrackers go off. It was so exciting. But what if you're a veteran and you saw your best friend get machine gunned with his chest bursting open and spraying blood and you having to hold on to them and they die in your arms? That's because that's how they processed it. I processed loud popping sounds with it's 4th of July. Basically the scene from Sandlot. Whenever I heard popping firecrackers, it was like I can already smell those steaming hot dogs on the grill. I can smell I grew up in like a mafia neighborhood. I can smell the too much cologne and all the fucking mob guys grilling in my neighborhood. I can smell the ice cream that everybody's eating. Like it's just like good times. Those are the emotions I had attached to firecrackers. And this guy who's a veteran, what emotions does he have attached to firecracker sounds? Bullets, trying to hide from getting shot, but at the same time trying to protect my friend, but at the same time being powerless, and later on feeling guilty that you could have saved him somehow. That's what reprocessing does. It resets what you feel like about that exact memory. And pretty soon, like how I mentioned about watching a horror movie, eventually now, like, look at how come I'm so calm talking about my past trauma? Because to me, thinking of a child being locked up in a room for 8 hours and being abandoned, it's like a drama, really devastating movie to me. But it has nothing to do with me, because I'm watching my memories as if I'm the star of this movie. So that is what EMDR does. Those are the basics. And so I want to tell you what to expect. So after this the hardest part is after that first reprocessing session. So like I said, the first two is the orientation, maybe the third one. So that first reprocessing session is the hardest. The reason why is because what are we used to? We're used to going to a talk therapist to talk to him weekly, every week or maybe every 2 weeks, right? And we just let's talk about it. Let's talk about it, right? Well, with EMDR, here's the thing. Because your brain is kind of like a computer hard drive. Remember I said, reprocessing memories, reprocessing trauma is like putting, a PS5 disc or a PS5 game to run on a Nintendo, right? It scrambles your brain. So when you do reprocessing, when you reprocess your trauma, for the next 2 weeks, you're going to take a break from your EMDR. Well, at least that's how it was done with me, because you're going to have pretty damn tremendous nightmares about your trauma. You're going to have really bad nightmares. And the reason why is because it's kind of like our computers. They update at night. Windows update while you're sleeping, right? Where you're getting a Windows update in your head, reprocessing this trauma. But guess what? 3 weeks later, you have zero emotion about that trauma. It's absolutely gone. And each time that you go to your EMDR therapist, you process a new trauma. I went for 6 months, which is pretty long, because of what happened to me. I mean, I was beat up by my dad. I was kidnapped. I was traumatized by my mom. I was traumatized by my girlfriend who abandoned me. Like there's so many things that I had to process that I had to go for quite a while. But I'm telling you, if you could get through the first, I would say, 3 to 6 months, it will change your fucking life. So those are the basics of what is EMDR, how a therapy session works. Now, let's talk about my story if you got any time left. I want to tell you directly, and I'm not going to try and share my life story. I have other videos about this. I have a video about death and grief that I made. I have plenty of videos on my podcast that you can listen to. I even have the video of where I was over medicated for fucking 2 years. I was on 8 medications in 2 years, and it made me worse. What I'm going to talk about is my journey through EMDR and how it affected me and what happened in my life and how I think about it now, right? So here's what happened. I'm sorry if I'm smirking. My fat cat is sleeping to the left of me, and he's snoring, and it sounds like when you pull a tight balloon together, it's like a whoopee cushion. It's really funny. So I'm trying to stay on track without laughing. But anyways, so what's with my story with and EMDR? Throughout my life, all these things, you know, I never realized that I had all these problems. I had severe anxiety. I had severe abandonment issues. I was so desperate to have friends all the time. I mean, and the worst part was is friendships that I had like fall apart throughout my life. They would make fun of me because I would go into a panic. They'd be like, like what when a normal friendship dissolves is basically how I have a friend. I had a friend for 25 years, and pre EMDR, I didn't realize that every time I was around him, my friendship with him consisted of me walking on eggshells and constantly entertaining him, constantly being like, "Yo, dude, you want to do this? You want to oh, you want to know something else funny? Oh, that wasn't funny. Let me tell you a funnier story." Like, I felt like I was a jester that was about to be executed, and I had to keep making this royal king laugh. It was absolutely, it was fucking me up to do that. And post EMDR, I was like, wait a minute. I have nothing in common with this fucking person. This person is miserable. And the reason why I entertain them is because they give me like zero sign of acceptance or like feeling that they even want to be my friend. And now I'm not friends. I've been friends with them for 25 years and I'm done with them because they're a negative person. So let's talk about what I went to EMDR for. Like I said, there's other videos that I made. There's a lot of shit that happened. Okay, I was abused as a kid, but what added me up to going into EMDR was recently what had happened. Despite all of the things in my childhood, over the years, I just developed, like I said, the abandonment issues from friendship. So what else? I developed one thing, a big problem that I had in my relationship with my wife was that any time that she felt sad or that she felt upset, that had nothing to do with me, maybe her boss was treating her like shit that day, or, she had a friend that said something mean to her, something that had zero to do with me. Anytime anytime I saw her in a sad mood, I went in a jester mode. I felt like, all right, time to do jokes, time to run around holding a hot dog in my butt cheeks and wiggling my ass to try and make her laugh because it's my responsibility to make her feel good. That's how fucked up I was because that's the role that I played living in this abusive childhood home, that it was my responsibility to make my whacked out fuckhead mother happy when she just wasn't a happy person. And so these are all these things that I had to mention to my EMDR therapist. Like, I feel like it's my responsibility to make people who are unhappy happy. Well, it isn't, And so I processed all of these things. And I can't tell you how better I feel. Like when I talk about it now, sometimes I feel either boring or like I'm annoying people about this trauma because it's so disconnected from me now, I'm so confident that it had nothing to do with it being my fault or that it was somehow in my control. It completely processed everything perfectly. I don't really know what aspects I should talk about my story. I mean, it's like I'm trying to think, like. So I mentioned a little bit about the abandonment. I mentioned the depression because of abandonment. That I also other things that I conquered through EMDR was like, how do I explain this? I never prioritized my feelings. And one of the other good quotes that I got mentioned through my EMDR therapist was, think about this. And this drives me insane. I was raised all right, maybe this is my theory. But you know what drove me fucking nuts when I realized it was growing up in the 90s. Think about everything in the 90s, right? When I think about the 90s, What's one of the biggest fucking words that was used in the 90s, right? People would say shit like, that's cool, man. That's cool, right? But you know what else what word they used? Yo, he's chill. He's chill, bro. He's chill. Like in a Pauly Shore voice, right? Why? Because back then, the person who was quote unquote cool, the person who was the person you wanted to be friends with or around was the person that was chill, which basically meant easygoing. Oh, he's easygoing, right? He's chill. He doesn't wig out, man, right? And so you had this whole population of people, or maybe I'm just talking from my personal experience, but I just sort of felt that being chill was the top priority. And to me, being raised in a family that I was treated like shit, I was absolute dirt, I was garbage. I was always on the bottom of that totem pole, and I had zero opportunity to move up. Because I was raised around that, I didn't realize how much in every situation that I was in, I never prioritized myself. So the quote that I sort of developed with influence from my EMDR therapist was, people who have low self-esteem and people who are depressed and anxious and who are traumatized, they have such low self-worth that the word selfish doesn't exist for them, because they are so, like, how do I put this? If level zero is obviously neutral, right? And most people, if most people are at zero, people who are selfish are maybe plus 20 or something, right? But most people are chill, so they're at zero. People who have low self-esteem or self-worth and who let people walk all over them, what is their level of selfishness? Like negative 40. They're so fucking low that because they've been stepped on their whole life. So I never realized when people told me, like, it'd be like, why would you put up with that at work? Why would you work at a place with a boss that's like that or that says things like that to you? I kept thinking, well, because that's how work is. That's how you're supposed to be treated. I had a boss who used to call me the N-word, and he'd call me a homo and a faggot and throw tools at me. And I'm like, oh, well, this is how work is. I mean, I'm here to get a check, so it really doesn't matter what they do. I mean, I can't do anything about it, you know? And the truth is, you fucking leave. You leave. You think about thyself. You be selfish. And that's what I would like to end on this, is that it completely changed me around, because I realized if people who have low self-worth and who are low self-esteem do their best to be selfish, they're going to go from negative 40 to zero. So they're not even being selfish. They're actually just doing self-care. They're being self-care. They're for once in their life saying no. And that's why it completely changed me around. After EMDR, I looked at all these aspects that I was being chill, that I was prioritizing being easygoing, right? So like I was even trying to write a comedy bit about this, how growing up, it was like people who freaked out about something or were mad about something. You know, somebody spit on them or took their money, their lunch money, a bully took it, right? They'd be like, yo, man, chill out. Don't freak out. You're going to have money tomorrow. And it's like, no, when somebody tells me to chill out or to not, like, what's the word? God damn, I'm at a loss for words because I'm so tired. You know, when people tell me to, like, not verify my feelings, like, you know what word I'm looking for, like, to the ability to not express what I'm feeling is not, that's them being selfish. I have that right. So when people tell me, wait a minute, what do you mean? So you're like not chill? And I go, yeah, I'm not chill. I have self-respect is what I am. You know what I'm saying? Like that's what I do, you know? And That's why it changed me around. That's why I'm at a point where, and here's the funny thing, how it coincides with my Taoism belief, because Taoism is, the yin and yang, the sun and moon, the light and the shadow, the balance of chaos and order, right? It's so funny. One of a Taoist principle that I live by is the more you push something, the more you try to force something, the stiffer it becomes. And the more you try to pull something towards you, the more it pulls away. You just have to flow with it. That's what the term Wu Wei means in Taoism, is just flowing down that river and just enjoying yourself. It's all about how you react to it. If you're going to try and float, if you're going to try and paddle to go faster, it's going to mess you up. You're going to tire yourself out. If you're like, no, life is going too fast, I don't want to flow with this river, I'm going to just try and keep blocking myself. Well, it's going to catch up to you, and also you will tire yourself out by being afraid of not flowing down this river. So, where the hell am I getting at? What I was saying is that the reason why this coincides with, EMDR and Taoism is that I mentioned how I had this obsession with desperately trying to develop these Disney movie, 90s movie friendships that, like The Sandlot. Oh, there's these group of kids there's these 12 best friends. They hang out every fucking day, their entire lives, and they even keep in touch when they're older. That's a fucking movie. That doesn't exist, And I was just so much grasping for that because, like I mentioned, friendship was the only love that I could get. I didn't get it from my family, but I was so desperate for it that after EMDR, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to let it flow. And whoever comes my way, it's going to they'll come my way. And the moment I stopped caring about having friends, I can't be left alone. I do stand up now. I've never had this many friends in my entire fucking life. What's funny is the amount of friends that I've made in the past 2 years is a bigger amount than I've had my entire life because I just started going with the flow. I conquered that trauma, and I started having self-respect. So I cut off the toxic friends. What about my job? I cut off toxic jobs. I'm done dealing with bosses. I'm done dealing with factories with racist homophobes who are miserable. Every single one of them are loaded with antidepressants or they're going through a divorce. They're miserable people. And what I kept telling when I was in denial and staring at myself in the mirror, I was like, you know what? But this is how work is. But I processed this through EMDR. I should have self-respect. But you know what finally made me make that decision is I was like, okay, wait a minute. There was 1 week where I was pinching sheet metal that was really heavy. It was a bigger gauge, and it snapped one of my thumbs, right? And I was sitting there and I was thinking to myself, how is my hand mobility going to be 6 years from now doing a job like this? Well, yeah, I'll probably have like Luke Skywalker robotic fucking hands because my hands are going to go to shit. But then when I went to lunch and I had time to, daydream and look at the grass outside and be a tree hugging hippie fucking Taoist, I thought to myself, well, wait a minute. I'm at this job where every day I listen to these motherfuckers complain that the world is filled with more N-words, that we're getting more and more gay and trans, that the goddamn Democrats this and the I don't give a fuck about politics. I don't care at all. But what is 10 years of that negativity going to do to me mentally? And I was like, fuck this place. Let them rot. I'm going to move on. I'm better than this. And that's what EMDR did to me. It made me gain this confidence. The other thing I want to mention is, before I end this video, I don't even know how long it's been. It's a fucking while. But why, I've had people ask me, because these are the questions that I asked. I was missed. So I want to talk real quick about my story about the when I got over medicated. I want to talk about that real quick. Long story short, what happened is I had for anybody who doesn't want to watch my other videos, what led me to my breakdown recently, and I mean by that like 2 years ago, was I had five of my family members die in a period of 2 years. It was my dad, then my uncle, then my grandma, then my cat, which was my first and only pet I've ever had in my entire life, and it only liked me, so I had quite a bond. And then my mom died 4 months ago in July or whatever that. I don't even remember because she was a cunt. You know what I'm saying? But anyways, yeah, so all those deaths. What ended up happening is my talk therapist ended up. And by the way, side note, I don't want this video to seem like I'm shitting on talk therapists. I still see my talk therapist once a month. I used to see him like twice a week. Now I see him honestly like once every 2 months because I'm doing so well from the EMDR. But I do like to, if people are asking me, they're like, oh, why would you see him at all if EMDR worked? Because he's the one who actually taught me about Taoism. And so he actually helps me meditate and get into that like self-awareness zone. So I don't really go to him like specifically for problems that I'm going through because I'm not going through that many problems as much as I used to. So he's like a Taoist guide more than a therapist for me. So what was I getting? So I was going to my Taoist. I've been going to that therapist since like 2016, I think. And when all these people died in my family, he told me, I listen, I don't fucking care. I mean, he didn't say it like that, but he's like, I don't care what you say. I order you to get a psychological evaluation because if you have to promise me that you're going to get one because the state that you're in, if I don't hear from you that you got a psychological evaluation in the next 4 hours, I'm calling the police that you might be, having suicidal ideation because I was so surrounded by death. And I'm pretty sure black metal doesn't help listening to when you're obsessed with fucking death around you. But yeah, I was getting some suicidal thoughts. So I went to this outpatient suicide program. The part that was funny that I wrote into a joke was that when I got the evaluation, they ask you like they ask you three questions. It's like, how likely are you to harm have you been thinking about harming any persons, any people? And I go no. And said, have you had any thoughts about harming yourself? And I put no because I didn't. And then the last question was, do you ever feel like when you can't wait to go to sleep because you want to go to sleep and never wake up again? I go, bro, I'm 35. I work in a welding shop. My lower back hurts, and I eat donuts at work. Sleeping is my fucking favorite hobby. So yeah, I put hell yeah. And that's what landed me in the suicide prevention program. But what happened from there was I realized, and once again, I don't want to sound condescending. I just felt like these are not my people. I was in this support group with a lot of like what I would say are lazy junkies. I know it's completely not Taoist of me. It's judgmental as fuck. But these were people who, they were looking for any reason to be put on a new medication and not looking in any way to try and like work on any of their issues. It's like, you like in my idea of a support group was like kind of almost like what I saw. Yeah. See how American I am because of movies, like what I saw in Fight Club. You go to these places, you spill your heart out and you look for support from strangers. I would go to these places and like every other time there was a guy there. People like me would be there for support, definitely. There were good people. But then there was a person who was like, I'm going today because I just want to fucking bitch somebody out and start a fight because of how shitty my life is. And I was like, this isn't for me. I have to do something else. And that's when my wife told me, she's like, listen, you did everything you can. You went from seeing your therapist once a week to twice a week to 3 times a week. Now you're in a suicide prevention program. Now you're going to fucking listen to me because I love you. You need to go on medication. And I went on 8 different medications. I don't know if I can remember all of them. I have a video before this that kind of was my most viral video on this channel. But yeah, I was on Prozac. I was on Zoloft, Seroquel, Trazodone, Gabapentin, Zyprexa, and then there was Klonopin, and then there was one more. I forgot what the 8th one was. Within a period of 2 years. I had a corporate drug dealer as a psychiatrist. He was a piece of shit. And you can listen to my other video about Zyprexa, how fucking horrible it was. I almost got diabetes because this piece of shit motherfucker misdiagnosed me with bipolar, and he put me on a schizophrenia pill. And I have messed up something in my body, either the histamines or the hormones, where I went from 220 pounds to 270 over 4 months, and I can't lose it. There's nothing I can do. So to be continued, I mean, I gained muscle, but I can't lose the fat that I have because of it. So you know what I'm saying at this point? You know what the conclusion is? Meds are bullshit. They're fucking bullshit. The only med that I had from my experience that benefited me was Zoloft. Because what happened is when the Zyprexa fucked all this. So I mentioned this in the other video, but the Zyprexa, it's an antipsychotic. When he put me on it, he didn't mention to me that the withdrawal is like scientifically like 6 times worse than fucking heroin. It's guaranteed to give you diabetes, and the withdrawal, I mean, I'm not exaggerating this. I literally, in January 2021, I literally thought January 2022, I literally thought that I was going to be locked up for life. Like I literally thought I was going to be like the guy in the straitjacket in a wheelchair, drooling from my mouth, while some abusive nurse, like shoves applesauce in my mouth while she's shattering my teeth because my jaw is clenched shut. Like it was, the best way I could explain it is I felt like I was going through life, but my hand wasn't on the steering wheel. Like what's that guy's name? There's that ninja in the Ninja Turtle cartoon from the 90s. There's a guy named Crane. He's like this giant muscular dude, and there's a brain that's operating him in his stomach. I felt like there was somebody in my brain steering me, and I was just like watching through the window, like I had zero control over the steering wheel. So the reason why I'm telling you this is because eventually I got put on. I told myself, I watched the video. The withdrawals were horrendous. I was crying violently while throwing up every hour for the first 2 weeks. No joke. I literally almost had to go to the emergency room because I was throwing up and crying so much that I became dehydrated from crying and throwing up. So I had to I literally for 2 weeks, I was just drinking nothing but Pedialyte. And I told myself, I said, I need something to help me with this. And the only thing I've ever heard that's good are SSRIs. I didn't have a good experience with Prozac. I heard that Prozac is very similar to Paxil, so I didn't. That was the 8th one. He tried putting me on Paxil, and I didn't have a good reaction to that. So I went on Zoloft again. Zoloft helped me get through the withdrawals, and it helped me become happier. But the thing about Zoloft is it affects people's sleep differently. The factory I worked at, Coincidentally, there was the yin and yang. There was a guy who was on the exact same dose as me who couldn't stop sleeping. Every fucking break that we had, I think we had like 2 breaks and a lunch, always sleeping. He wouldn't even eat. He would just go to sleep for 15 minutes, always sleeping. That's how 25 milligrams, or I think he was on 50 milligrams of Zoloft affected him. I was on 25. This other guy was on the same dose as me, 25 milligrams of Zoloft, and he couldn't sleep at all. And that's what happened to me. From January 2022 to March, to April, I literally slept about an average of 40 hours per month. So almost like I would say like 4 or 5 hours a week. And I'm not even joking. I literally, and it was crazy too, because people are like, how did you put up with that? Well, Zoloft helps you not have anxiety. So I would literally go to sleep for like 2 hours. And then when I woke up 2 hours later, it felt like I had a fucking IV into my vein of espresso. I was completely I felt completely refreshed, like I slept 8 hours. And I'm just like, well, I don't know what the hell I'm going to do for 7 hours till I get work. So I just came up with a routine, because that whole month it would be like one day I would sleep 2 hours. Next day I would sleep 7. Next day I would sleep not at all. Next day I would sleep 1. It was so messed up that I was just like, all right, well, I'm just going to watch to distract me from being anxious about how much insomnia I have. I was like, I'm just going to watch trilogies of movies from as a kid. Like, it would be like, all right, well, I can feel I'm not going to sleep tonight. I'm going to watch all the Godfathers. Then 2 days later, I'm going to watch all the Indiana Joneses. And after doing that for 4 months, I was so burnt out that I almost crashed into a tree, that I was like, all right, it's time to get off of this pill. But I still feel some panic and lingering in the background. And that's when I started my EMDR treatment, and that's where I am today. And to end this video off, okay, what I want to say is, so before I end off the medication part, what I want to say is, because you're like me, you're the people listening right now, you're probably as aggravated as I was when I was in the peak of my depression, anxiety, obsessive thinking. And what I'm talking about is, you're probably like, oh yeah? So you're telling me this EMDR, it's like a fucking silver bullet, right? To be honest, it really is. It's not a silver. Here's the last quote that I'm going to say that my EMDR therapist told me. He told me, he goes, so tell me about one of your traumas. And I told him about this whole thing about getting locked up. I go, yeah, when I was like 6 years old, I think it was somewhere between 6 and 12 years old, I did something that I didn't know what I did wrong. So my mom locked me up in my room for 6 hours, and I didn't know where to go to the bathroom. And he goes, okay, so that's your trauma. And he goes, and you know that there's other people out there, like women who get raped or mugged, and then there might be like somebody, some kid from the hood that experienced a drive-by, right? Or like, because there's gang activity in fucking Inglewood, Chicago, right? He goes, and I go, yeah, why? What's your point? And he goes, okay, you know what's funny about meds? He goes, every single one of you, the raped girl, the kid who lives around gangbangers, you're all going to be prescribed Prozac. You're all going to be prescribed whatever the fuck. Seroquel, Trazodone, Gabapentin. That's bullshit. There is no... You're telling me every single one of those things works for all these different... It's a silver bullet, right? It works for these specific... It's bullshit. It doesn't work. It's like when you go to a car mechanic. When you need a new tire... Right? Say you got a Prius. You cannot put a Ford 350 pickup truck wheel on a Prius. You can't put a fucking motorcycle tire on a semi-truck. It doesn't work that way. But that's how the healthcare system wants you to think about meds. You're all going to be, there's no pill. And that's what he told me to my face. He goes, Phil, you got locked up, traumatized, abandoned by your mom in a room for 6 hours to where you had to soil yourself. Where is there a pill for that? Well, you know what? Maybe in the future there'll be AIs that develop personalized pill for that. But even when that happens, it's better to process them naturally. And that quote stuck in my mind forever. And that's what gave me the confidence to go through with this difficult EMDR. Okay. And that's why the point that I was getting at is when I was looking for EMDR, I was skeptical. I was like, oh, really? You mean EMDR can conquer bipolar? It can conquer OCD? It can conquer fucking depression? Whatever the fuck. And the answer is yes, it can conquer all of those. The reason why is because I was going to talk about this in another video, but here's the truth. This is the truth, okay? Yeah, my name's Wild Phil. I'm not a fucking professional medical doctor or anything, but this is the truth, and trust me. You know how many people have mental illness? 100%. Every fucking person out there has mental illness. But you know what the problem is? Because of things like Abrahamic religion, good versus evil, everybody thinks black and white. So when I got misdiagnosed with bipolar, I'm like, okay, so overnight, I went from normal person to now I'm fucking Kanye. That's bullshit. Everybody has mental illness, but maybe this person has one. If you could measure mental illness with like some fucking magical Ghostbusters meter, right? Or like what they measure radiation in, right? They could be like, well, you know what? Here's fucking, I don't know, Jason. And we click the gun on him and it says, well, his reading says that he has bipolar, but his bipolar is at about 12%. And turns out, he exercises regularly and he does yoga, so he manages it very well. But then there's this person who has 60% bipolar plus PTSD, and not to mention, what do? They eat gas station food, they play video games, and they sit at home with the fucking shades shut, not getting any vitamin D because they're severely depressed. Well, so they're not managing it at all. And that's the point that I'm getting at, is that EMDR teaches you how to reprocess that trauma, which makes everything better, no matter what your ailment is. And secondly, it makes you confident to make yourself manage it better. So that is the last thing I want to talk about as far as meds, as far as why EMDR is so great. What I want to leave you with is the quote that my doctor told me. I'm really going to try and not get emotional. But I remember the last day that I went to my EMDR therapist. I think it was around August. And we had gone through everything. I remember how I said that he could read me like anything. I mean, an example of what he said was, I was like confused. I was telling him about how abandoned I felt because I couldn't speak English and make friends. And he's like, yes, and that probably made you develop almost like a sixth sense to be able to read people by their behavior because you couldn't communicate with people. And I go, yeah, that's crazy. Yes, I've always kind of felt like I could just like be with a person for like 5 minutes and I know I could notice every little thing about them. Why? Because when you can't communicate, you observe. Anyways, here's what I was going to get at. I remember we went through all these traumas. We went through me feeling guilt because I need responsibility to make my mom feel happy. I remember feeling abandonment because my mom locking me in my room. Then she sent me off to college and said that she changed all the locks so I can either go to fucking college and pay with my own money or I can be on the streets. These are all, so guilt, abandonment, right? And then one day I walk in and remember, I said this was August 2022 and my mom had died in July. So obviously I went there to process some death. because that's a whole nother, I talk about it in my death episode about processing the death of somebody who fucking completely victimized you. But I'm going to end it off with this because I know I'm going to get emotional, but I went in there, or maybe I won't because they EMDR'd my ass, but I went in there in August. I sit down and my therapist goes, "So, Phil, how's it going?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, pretty good." Like it's, it was, I could sort of feel that it was going to be a talk session because I felt really good. I felt like I processed everything. So I'm sitting there. He goes, how do you feel? I go, honestly, I feel really, really good. And the crazy thing is, before I went to that session, I already was thinking about mentioning to him that I kind of feel like I don't know what else there is left to process. But before I could say that, he asked me, "Yeah, so you feel really good?" And I go, "Yeah, I do. Why?" And he goes, "Because I wanted to talk to you about your progress." And I go, "What do you mean?" He goes, "How do you feel about your progress here?" And I go, "I'm sorry, man." I'm like cracking up. I go, "Well, I've never felt this good in my life. And I feel like every single trauma that I've been through, I've destroyed. I've conquered. I've overcome it. I feel like if this was a video game, I've beat all the bosses." And he just fucking smiled. He just smiled in my face, leaned forward and goes, "Congratulations. I wish you the best for the rest of your life." I broke down crying from happiness. I was like, I couldn't even fathom this happening. I've been going to talk therapists since I was in high school. With every therapist I went to, the conclusion was, either they pissed me off and they weren't helping me, or I moved on, or I felt like I was on a good path and then it came back. And this was the first time where he said, "Guess what, Phil? You fucking conquered your demons. Welcome to the rest of your amazing life. And I hope that you have an amazing life by choosing EMDR. Thank you for watching this video." Yeah, I don't know what else to say. I'm tired and I got a lump in my throat. Thank you. Hope you subscribe. Hope you like this video. Let me know how EMDR helps you. You can comment, whatever. And for all my comedian friends, roast the shit out of me for getting this deep. Good night.